Happy Saturday morning and welcome to this 14th edition of the second season of Fantasy Football Come True. You can catch Fantasy Football Come True every week right here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio.com. This is the show that wants to help you put some green in your jeans. I'm your host, Hot Rod Funderburk. I'm joined by my co-host, Ron Fun. And Ron Fun is in the house. However, Ron Fun, you are not in the house. You have left North Carolina. That is the rumor. The rumor is that you decided to see some slopes. Is that true, Ron Fun? What's going on, my man?
Hey, my man, that's what the rumor is. The rumor is that, but I might as well be in North Carolina, man, because because COVID had other things to do, man. I was supposed to go skiing this week, and COVID shut me down, man. So all my friends are in Colorado, man, but I ain't really get a chance to make it out there with them to hang out with them like that. So.
I got you. I feel it is like that sometime. Well, we hope you feel better for sure, man. But anyway, has it come to Fantasy Football Come True? We're back in week 14. We're coming down to that final stretch of the season. And not only do things get interesting for the teams, but it gets interesting for all the fantasy football owners out there as we get ready to wrap up the season. And of course, before we get into the meat of our show, man, I always like to go over a few items that we discussed last week. And between Nate and, of course, Nate is not here today. Nate is out on assignment. He is doing his thing. We had a great talk last week. I mean, the discussion was fire. It was awesome last week, man. I mean, we went over some stuff. Like one of the things, we had a caller come in, or a emailer, one of our listeners, and he said, yo, do you start Kittle? And, of course, you and Nate had a discussion on that, man. Talk to us about what Kittle did with and what we suggested with Kittle, what you and Nate suggested with Kittle last week.
Hey, man, Kittle smashed the slate last week. You saw it coming with Deebo Samuel he's not on injured reserve, but with Deebo Samuel having a growing injury, and you knew that he was not going to be part of the offense. You also knew that there are other key players on that offense that were also injured. And so Kyle Shanahan, he knows how to scheme and script players in for what he's looking for. And Nate said it last week, start Kittle on your slate as your tight end, as in your flex. And he said, I mean, that was his call of the week. And he said, if you don't do it, you're in trouble. And if you didn't do it, you were in trouble, because he put up 40 plus points just himself.
Yeah, he put up 42 fantasy points, man. I mean, like you said, he destroyed the slate, and that's off the chain. That's what you want. That's what you look for in your bounce back player.
Yeah. Not only do you look for that in your bounce back, what you're looking for is, how does a guy like Nate get that right? How do we get that right week in, week out? And it really does come down to process. It comes down to understanding football. We understand game scripts. We understand price points. And also Kittle was pretty inexpensive for the amount of production that he was going to have. And you've seen him do it in the past. And so that's a big up to Nate on that one. That's not his first time doing it. That won't be his last time doing it, calling some 40 burgers.
No doubt. That's what Nate does. That's why he's on the show with us from time to time and doing his thing. But of course, Ron Fun, we can't let what you said and what you discussed last week go unmentioned at all. You had some fire calls on some running backs last week. You know, one of them was, is it Madison or Matson? Am I saying his name correctly? He had a heck of a game in place with Dalvin Cook last week.
Yeah, Alexander Madison. I said sit him just because I didn't think he was going to pay off as much. He actually just barely paid off. So for him to be 7,600 points, you needed to get 23 points or more from him, and that's what he gave you, no more, no less. But my call last week was to sit him in favor of Antonio Gibson, who was in the 5,700 range, and Antonio Gibson paid off. He was closer to a 4X production, so a little bit better than Alexander Madison. So, you know, again, if you happen to listen to what we said, even if you sat Alexander Madison, even if you felt like he reasonably paid off, if you sat him but went with some of the other running backs, we also talked about Sony Michel being in the payoff spot last week. We also talked about a few other running backs being in great spots, and Also, Joe Mixon. We said fade Joe Mixon, and that's also a very big call. And if you did that, if you just listened to our show and tried to listen to our show with some takeaways into your lineup, you made money last week because we had you fade Mixon, and fading Mixon against the Chargers' weak run defense was a hard thing to do. But our show, we just make it easy to do the right thing, even when it's hard to do.
Definitely. That was one of the games that you guys had called last week, man. That Chargers Bengal game. It wound up being a 63-point game. And you're talking about having a combination of Burrows and Higgins out there in that game, which I think you and Nate talked about, the Burrow-Higgins combination. I mean, that should have taken you to the promised land after that one.
Yeah. And fading Mixon. So if you did,
that's right.
Yeah. That's right. If you did both, you're really in the house. So needless to say, last week was a very strong week for the Fantasy Come True Network, Tobacco Sports Radio. But hopefully this upcoming week will be just as fruitful. And we just got to stick with the process.
Oh, definitely. We're going to get into the upcoming week. Now, do you remember any of the nasty picks that you and Nate had mentioned last week? Because we do a nasty, for those of you who just tuned in, we just started doing a nasty pick at the end of the show where Nate and Ron, they'll be on and they'll decide just, who's that definitely blue collar worker down in the ground, halfway practice team trying to figure out how they can get on and get you some points. Talk about your nasty pick that you hit.
Yeah, my nasty pick last week was one of the tight ends, Conklin. He was very, very cheap. And then I also had another very, very cheap tight end last week. I'm struggling to remember that particular pick, but Conklin was one of the cheaper, easy picks. And I want to believe who was the other tight end?
I thought you would mention the wide receiver Josh Reynolds, or was that Nate?
That was Nate. Nate was on the Josh Reynolds.
Okay.
Nate was on Josh Reynolds. And both our tight ends paid off. The cheap tight ends, even the expensive tight ends. So if you just did anything we asked you to do last week, you paid off.
No doubt. And that's what it's all about, man. And then you mentioned, and hopefully that the upcoming games will be great. And let's jump on over there into the upcoming games, especially the ones starting out tomorrow, because it is NFL Football Sunday, Week 14, and we got some good fantasy games coming up. And of course, audience, we like to find those games that are going to be some high scoring games, or at least the games we think that are going to be high scoring. And so we've got some pretty good contests coming up this week. We got the Saints at the Jets. Falcons are taking on the Panthers in a divisional game. The Seahawks are traveling over to the Texans. The Ravens are at the Browns in a divisional game. The Raiders at the Chiefs in another divisional game. Cowboys at Washington. This must be divisional weekend going on. The Giants taking on the Chargers. 49ers going to see Cincy. The Bills are going to be at Tampa Bay. That should be a good game. Lions are going to be over at the Broncos. And, of course, the Jaguars are taking on the Titans in another divisional game. I like the way they have these divisional games stacked toward the end of the season because it makes them mean something, man. Nobody's taking the end of the season off, which also makes it fun and valuable for fantasy football. So just hollering at these games, Ron Fun, man, what you thinking? What's on your mind coming up on these games?
I feel like we have a really power-packed slate this weekend, and I think the easiest one to start with is the Dallas Cowboys going up against the Washington football team. Those two teams have generated fireworks on both sides of the ball. The Washington football team has historically allowed a lot of points for the opposing quarterback. They've allowed a lot of points for the opposing wide receivers. And Dallas Cowboys they've also done the same thing. They've been in high-scoring games throughout the season. So I'm looking for that game to actually be a high-score one. I have yet to really break this game down to see which players we want to target, players that are going to also give you some value. But given that you're a Cowboys fan, what do you think about that game? And where would you be placing your wagers this week? in
Man,
that
I'll
game.
be honest with you, man. I will be putting my wagers on Gibson this week for the Washington Redskins. And that's simply just from a coaching standpoint. If you're looking at that ball game, Ron, and you're coaching that game, what do you want to do? Supposedly now, Dallas has a high-powered offense, supposedly. So the best way to beat a high-powered offense is to do what? Is to keep that offense off the field. How do you keep an offense off the field? You run the ball, you play defense. So running back Gibson has had a pretty good couple of weeks these past weeks. It's going to take some pressure off the quarterback Heinicke if you can run the ball, and it's not going to force Heinicke to do things that he's not comfortable doing. So I think, a guy like Gibson could get it on because Dallas's defense has been known to be vulnerable against the run. They've been known to be vulnerable in all kinds of places. The only problem is, they got some key guys coming back up front on that line, defensive line. So it is possible that Dallas could stand up this week. But I tell you what, that Dallas offense is not looking the way I would like for it to look. So even if I look and went on the other side of the ball to Dallas, if I had to pick someone out of that game, I'd really go with CeeDee Lamb. Simply because CeeDee Lamb can stretch the field. And I think that's who Dak is most comfortable with, not to mention the fact he's had the most targets on the team anyway. And of course, that's part of our process. Is it not, Ron Fun?
That's right. Is looking at targets, etc. And so with that being said, I think you're exactly right on Antonio Gibson. He's coming in at 6,000 DraftKings points this week, and 6,000 times 3. What we're looking for is 18 points out of Antonio Gibson. And I think it's going to be easy to get 18 points for Antonio Gibson. If you look at his production the last several weeks, I told you last week he's been getting touches in the 20s, touches and targets. He's got 7 targets in the passing game as well. And so when you think about the amount of rushes that he's in store for, combined with a passing attack that he's in, I think he's in a great place, and he's only 6,000. So I definitely think of that game, you definitely want to have some Antonio Gibson.
No doubt. I'm with you on that. Now, I was talking to somebody earlier about this game, and of course, everybody is saying, well, Zeke is a little banged up. On the other side of it, would you start Zeke or would you start Pollard? To be honest with you, me, Ron Fun, and correct me if you have different thinkings, but I wouldn't start Pollard or Zeke. Number one, I wouldn't start Zeke in this game because he is banged up and he's not doing well. But I wouldn't start either one of these guys in this game because you're talking about a Ron Rivera coach defense. At least that up front 7 has the Ron Rivera stamp all over it, even with Chase Young not playing and be able to anchor the defense the way that he is. So running against this Washington defense in a divisional game at home in FedEx Stadium, I think it will be a difficult job for any running back, whether it be Pollard or Zeke in the backfield. And that's just where I'm coming from. However, what happens, Ron, if somehow Dak is able to get out, do his thing, and put some points up, what happens then?
If Dak is able to get out and scramble, that means Washington is going to have to do the same thing to keep up. But Washington is going to try to keep that offense off the field, Dallas's offense off the field. So I think it's the Washington pass catchers. It could be Scary Terry having an opportunity. It depends on who's guarding Terry. Diggs has had a lynch, what do they call it, linchpin to shut down the number one wide receiver for the opposing offense. But he might actually be able to make it work this week. Scary Terry, that is.
Yeah, Terry McLaurin, for those of you out there, wide receiver for the Redskins. That's who Ron Fun was just alluding to. But listen, Ron Fun, we're going to come back in just a little bit. Audience out there, we're going to take a break because we're up against a break. Our producers are telling us. So when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the games that are coming up that we're liking. We just told you about the Dallas Cowboy Redskins and what we're thinking. And then after that, we're going to be doing our stardom or sit-em segment. But first, we'll be back after these quick messages. And welcome back, audience, to Fantasy Football Come True, where you can find us right here on TobaccoRoadSportsRadio.com every Saturday morning. I'm your host, Hot Rod Funderburk. I'm here with the usual panel my co-host Ron Fun, and of course, we're just having a good time chopping it up Saturday morning before we jump into week 14 of the NFL fantasy football season. And of course, Ron Fun, before we left, we're talking about that Dallas Cowboy game and what we thought could happen in it and what the game plan might be. Are there any other games coming up this week that you think might be worth checking out, or at least might be heating your pockets up a little bit?
Well, I'm really needing to get this Buffalo Bills Tampa Bay Buccaneers game right. It's actually the highest game on the slate, but I'm typically saying, hey, let's just go all in on the highest game of the slate. But man, I'm baffled by this Buffalo Bills offense. I'm baffled by their defense. I'm baffled. Can they generate enough points on a 52-week game? Last week those guys played the New England Patriots, and the New England Patriots had their way with the Buffalo Bills. The New England Patriots only threw the ball 3 times throughout that game, and I'm just wondering, what does that mean for this week with regards to the Buffalo Bills and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? Talk to me.
Well, I'm going to tell you what, with Tampa Bay and the Buffalo Bills going at it this year, I feel what you're saying. But when you're talking about Buffalo Bills having to play the New England Patriots, Bill Belichick is always going to take something away from you. Now, Josh Allen had a not so good showing, and I expect him to bounce back and be much better in this week's contest. I really do. They need it. And I think that Tampa Bay defense is a little weak in the secondary. So there is an opportunity for Josh Allen to make some plays down the field. Besides, Josh Allen's holding over $250 million bag in his hand. So $250 million, you better do something. You better be the bounce back player of the year if you ain't going to be the bounce back player week 14. I mean, come on, you need to do something. But then, of course, Tom Brady is always going to push the issue. Tom Brady, he's still not going to have Antonio Brown back. But he's still going to be doing his thing with his wide receivers. I mean, the wide receiver that you like whenever Antonio Brown is not there is Mike Evans. I mean, you love Mike Evans.
I love Mike.
That's what I'm saying. So he's going to push the ball down the field with Mike Evans. But if they need to, and of course, Bill Belichick did exploit a little bit in the Monday Night Football game. And I think we could see running back. Big man, it was
Leonard Fournette.
Leonard Fournette. We could see Leonard Fournette getting some burn and getting some carries. But I think that will happen only if they can if Tom Brady can loosen up that defense and the Bills expect Brady to really pass the ball. But I think it's going to be a pretty good game, man.
I like the pass catchers. Mike Evans, he's actually pretty cheap in this game. He's coming in under 7,000 DraftKings points. I want to think he's coming in at 6,600 DraftKings points this week. Also, Leonard Fournette is coming in at 7,400 DraftKings points. And if the New England Patriots game script is followed by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Leonard Fournette should run all day long on the Buffalo Bills. And so, for Leonard Fournette to be 7,400 points times 3, he should pay off with point score 2,100. I kind of actually like Leonard Fournette. If he just gets 2 touchdowns, and he's going to get a buck, he's going to get 100 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns, 100 yards rushing, that pays off right there. And so, given that the New England Patriots just manned up on the Buffalo Bills last week and said, we dare you to stop the run. You can't stop our run. I feel like Tampa Bay is going to follow the same script, and I actually like getting involved with Leonard Fournette.
Okay. All right, Ron Fun, you like the Leonard Fournette. I tell you what, there's another game that I like out there. We don't really have time to talk about it because we got to get into our stardom or sit 'em segment. But that's the Las Vegas Raiders at the Kansas City Chiefs, man. Vegas has that one as a 51.5 game, But listen, when Derek Carr is doing his thing and gets over 300 yards, he usually wins the ball game. And a guy like Patrick Mahomes on the other side of the ball could potentially push a Derek Carr to get 300 yards. And that's all we can really say about that game. We got to jump into this start 'em or sit 'em segment. And that's coming up right now, Ron Fun. I got an email from one of our listeners by the name of Tony Morris. Tony Morris wanted to know, you got DK Metcalf playing against the Texans this coming Sunday, tomorrow. Do you start DK Metcalf against the Texans or do you sit him? Ron Fun, what do you think?
Hey, man, DK Metcalf, he's a specimen. I think you start that man going against the Texans. I don't think Seattle's going to need to throw the ball a lot to beat the Houston Texans, but I believe that DK Metcalf is such an integral part of the Seattle Seahawks offense, and at the price point that he is, I think you start him against the Houston Texans.
No doubt. I'm with you on that. And plus, I think the Texans secondary is like the worst 3 in the NFL for giving up fantasy points. So, they give up a lot of fantasy points with DK Metcalf, and really DK Metcalf and Russell Wilson. I think it's time for them to try and start getting on the same page. I know Wilson had a little injury to his finger and probably hadn't been able to get the ball downfield and over to Metcalf the way that Metcalf wants it. But yeah, I'm with you on that one, Ron Fun. I think Tony Morris, if you're out there listening, buddy, DK Metcalf, go ahead and start him against the Texans this coming tomorrow, my good man. Ron Fun, I got another email from a Keith Spates. He says the Chiefs are playing the Raiders this coming tomorrow. Do you sit or do you start Hunter Renfrow?
Ooh, Renfrow. Spates, my man. Remember Spates used to have the starter jacket back in the day? We used to have all the starter jackets, man. Yes, that was the starter jackets was how we started even just learning about all of these different football brands. But Hunter Renfrow coming in at 6,100 DraftKings points. I think you got to start him again, as you mentioned at the top of the segment here, as we looked at some of the games. It's one of the high scoring games that Vegas has. Additionally, you want to look for people with targets, and Hunter Renfrow is consistently snatching targets week in, week out. Last week, Hunter Renfrow was another one of Nate's calls. I believe I actually said start the tight end Morrow because he was for 2,700, and Nate followed that up with going after Hunter Renfrow. And Hunter Renfrow had another great week. He put up a close to 20 points last week. And I think DraftKings continues to disrespect Hunter Renfrow with regards to price. And at 6,100, if you're looking for a cheap plug-in, Hunter Renfrow is somebody you can plug in very cheap, and he's going to get you 8 targets, maybe even 12 in a game that is going to be a high-scoring game, and a game where he's going to be needed to win the game.
So, Ron Fun, what you saying all that and possibly being a high-scoring game, if I'm out there and I'm looking for a quarterback, let's take Derek Carr, because he's going to be in a game where he's playing against Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is going to, I'm sure he's going to toss the ball around. He's always going to look deep. And of course, he's beginning to take the underneath things. A quarterback like Derek Carr, would you say that he is possibly worth starting in a divisional game like this, going against the Chiefs, especially over in Arrowhead Stadium?
Most definitely. Our strategy here on this show is we like to pay down at quarterback. And the highest quarterback on the slate is Patrick Mahomes. He's coming in at 8,000. And Derek Carr is at 5,900. I could play Derek Carr and feel like I'm going to get just as much production out of Derek Carr as I would Patrick Mahomes. And I'm going to be able to save 2,100 DraftKings points. Think about what you could do with that savings and point total savings. Think about you could buy somebody else or add to another player, or add to a place where you're weak. And so I think Derek Carr is going to be highly owned as a cash game play tomorrow versus Kansas City. And it's fine. It's fine to start him, to have him highly owned, but I definitely believe he's going to be highly owned.
Yeah, because I'm with you on that. I think that is probably going to be a high-scoring game. I know Vegas has it coming in at 51.5, but I think they're going to push the issue. I mean, even after I saw the Raiders play the Cowboys and Carr was able to do his thing, go ahead and hit that 300 yards and and win the ball game. Carr is somebody I would definitely be putting in my lineup, especially when you're talking about having the other opponent to get out ahead of you, and then you got to turn around and play catch up and score those points in order to keep up and win the ball game. So that is going to be awesome. Well, listen, fantasy audience, we're coming down to the end of our show. Ron Fun and I, we tried to go over a couple of games with you. The Buffalo Bills at the Tampa Bay Bucks. Keep an eye. There's some fantasy points you can dig out of there. Of course, the Dallas Cowboys and the Washington football team. We feel like there's some fantasy points you can dig out there. And, of course, we just had the last conversation with you, the Las Vegas Raiders over at the Kansas City Chiefs. We think in that game there could be some points to dig out of there. And as much as we hate to go, time flies when you're having fun. And, of course, we've reached the end of our show. But if you ever need to get a hold of my man, Ron Fun, he's going to tell you how you can reach out and get a hold of him.
Hey, if you ever need me, you can reach me with the handle @RonFun on any major platform. And that platform could be Twitter or Instagram or anything. And also, I'm going to do a little quick PSA. Had some bad news. One of my classmates passed, and it just lets me know how fragile life is. And so this public service announcement is, if you aren't doing something that you enjoy, stop what you're doing and go find something that you enjoy and go do it. You know, life's too short. And also find that person that you need to say sorry to about something, and make an amend on any of your historical relationships that you may need to make amends with regard. So that's my PSA for the week, man.
No doubt, Ron Fun. That is some good stuff, my brother. Good stuff. And of course, on behalf of co-host Ron Fun and myself, I'm your host, Hot Rod Funderburk. Make sure you guys tune in next week to Fantasy Football Come True right here on TobaccoRoadSportsRadio.com. This is the only fantasy show that wants to see you put some money in your pocket.